name is Esther, a woman who seemed to have it all: wealth, a successful career, and the kind of life many dream of. Yet one thing was missing: love, marriage, a man to call her own. Under mounting pressure from family and society, Esther made a desperate choice. She contracted a man she barely knew and even paid her own bride price, just to silence the mockery around her. She believed that would end her pain. But in truth, her real struggle was only beginning. What unfolds in this story will leave you with a powerful lesson about life, self-worth, and the meaning of true happiness. Before we dive in, don't forget to hit the like button. And if you're new here, kindly subscribe and join us on this unforgettable journey of lessons, love, and second chances. Let's get started. At 32, she was the first daughter of her family, a position that once brought pride but had slowly turned into a chain. For most of her life, Esther had worn the title of Ada, the first daughter, like a crown. Growing up in the bustling streets of Enugu, it meant respect. Aunties sent her on errands with a wink. Uncles called her Mama Nine, as if she carried the authority of a second mother. She was the one who mediated childish quarrels, the one her two younger sisters, Amaka and Chidinma, ran to when the world bruised their hearts. But tonight, as the orange glow of kerosene lanterns flickered across her mother's veranda, the same title felt like a weight pressing on her chest. The distant hum of generators from neighboring houses filled the quiet street like a low, restless drumbeat. A breeze carried the sweet, smoky scent of roasted corn from the roadside vendors, but it only sharpened the hollow ache in her stomach. Her mother's voice sliced through the evening air. "Chimo, Esther, your sisters are carrying their children in their arms. Yet you, what exactly are you waiting for? Gray hair?" Esther stiffened. She had heard the words 100 times, each repetition grinding deeper into her soul. Inside, she could hear the clatter of plates as her mother set down the evening meal. Amaka's laughter floated out from the sitting room, soft, musical, almost taunting. Chidinma, the baby of the family, was probably rocking her newborn, the child that had turned their mother's constant complaints into songs of pride. Esther pulled her shawl tighter around her shoulders and forced a smile when her mother emerged. Mama's head tie was tied in an elaborate rose, her wrapper the color of ripe mango. She stood with arms akimbo, her gaze sharp enough to cut. "My daughter," Mama said, her voice dropping to the tone that carried both love and accusation. "What is your plan? Do you want to live in that big house of yours, all alone, until the walls begin to talk back?" Esther wanted to answer. She wanted to say that she had built a life of her own, senior banker, homeowner, the pride of her office. But the words died before they reached her lips. Because no matter how many zeros appeared on her paycheck, no matter how elegant her Camry looked under the evening sun, her mother's eyes saw only an empty finger where a wedding band should be. From the sitting room, Amaka's husband's laughter rolled out like a slow thunder. The sound, once comforting, now burned like pepper on Esther's tongue. Her phone buzzed. A message from her colleague Funmi blinked on the screen. "Girl, when is it our turn to buy aso ebi for your own wedding?" "We are waiting, oh," followed me 3 teasing emojis. Esther's lips tightened. She typed a reply, "Lowell, soon," and erased it before hitting send. What was there to say? She rose and walked to the edge of the veranda. Across the street, children chased each other with glowing fireflies and glass jars, their laughter rising like tiny bells. For a moment, Esther envied their innocence, the way they believed the world would give them everything simply because they wished for it. Behind her, Mama spoke again, softer now. "My daughter, I just want to dance at your wedding before these knees grow too weak." The words, soaked in both love and pressure, landed like stones in Esther's heart. Later that night, lying in the quiet of her bedroom, Esther stared at the ceiling fan spinning lazily above her. Shadows from the moonlight danced on the walls like mocking silhouettes. She thought of the years she had poured into her career, the long nights balancing accounts, the weekends sacrificed for deadlines, the promotions she had fought for and won. She had imagined that success would silence the whispers, but the whispers had grown louder. Friends at the bank teased her over lunch. Aunties at church offered pity disguised as prayers. Even her own reflection seemed to question her worth. As the hum of the generator faded into the early hours of the morning, Esther buried her face in her pillow. The pillow smelled faintly of her lavender body cream, a scent once soothing but now tinged with the sharpness of unshed tears. For the first time in years, she admitted a truth she had long avoided. Despite all her achievements, she felt utterly, achingly alone. And somewhere deep inside, a dangerous thought began to whisper. Maybe marriage is the only way they will finally see me. Maybe marriage is the only way I will finally be enough. The following weeks blurred into one long, exhausting rhythm of polished smiles and private sighs. Esther woke before dawn every day, her alarms slicing through the fragile quiet of the house she had worked so hard to buy. The duplex, her pride, sat at the end of a leafy street in Independence layout, its cream walls and rose gold gates gleaming with success. But inside, the rooms were too still. Each creak of the staircase, each echo of her own footsteps reminded her that she lived alone. She dressed each morning in tailored suits and crisp blouses, her high heels clicking across the marble floor as if to convince herself she belonged to the world she had built. Colleagues at Zenith Bank greeted her with respect. Clients listened when she spoke. On the surface, her life was the dream many prayed for. Yet beneath the smooth, professional mask, something inside her was beginning to crack. During lunch breaks, the chatter of her colleagues became a slow torture. One afternoon, Funmi, the most flamboyant among them, slid into the seat beside her, the aroma of jollof rice and fried plantain clinging to her hair. "Esther, my dear," Funmi said with a mischievous grin, "we are still waiting, oh. When will we wear your aso ebi? I'm tired of only buying for other people's weddings. You are keeping us on suspense." The others at the table burst into laughter. Even the usually reserved Diobi covered her mouth to hide a giggle. Esther forced a smile and lifted her spoon, pretending to be amused. "Don't worry," she said lightly, her voice steady though her chest tightened. "I'll surprise you people." Funmi winked. "Better be Suno. 32 is knocking. Sorry. It has knocked already." The laughter grew louder. Esther managed a dry chuckle, but her fingers trembled slightly as she reached for her glass of water. That evening, she stayed late at the office under the excuse of clearing reports. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead as she stared at her computer screen without really seeing it. Their laughter replayed in her head, sharp and mocking. By the time she drove home, the city had already swallowed itself in night. The streets shimmered with the red glow of brake lights and the distant thrum of Afro beats from roadside bars. In her car, Esther gripped the steering wheel and fought the sudden sting of tears. She hated that her friend's words could wound her so deeply, but loneliness has a way of magnifying every slight. At home, her mother's call came just as she kicked off her heels. "Esther, my daughter," Mama began without greeting, her voice rich with both affection and impatience. "Your sister Chidinma says she might give us another baby next year. Amaka's husband just bought her a new car. And you, how far? Are you even talking to anyone?" "Mama, I'm fine," Esther said, her tone carefully neutral. "Fine is not marriage," her mother replied sharply. "A woman's glory is in her home." "What are you waiting for?" The words landed like blows. Esther mumbled something about being tired and ended the call quickly, her heart pounding. Later, she stood before the large mirror in her bedroom. Her reflection stared back. A beautiful woman with smooth brown skin and eyes that once sparkled with ambition. But tonight, those eyes looked weary, almost haunted. She thought of the years she had given to her career. Long nights chasing promotions. Countless weekends sacrificed for corporate deadlines. She had believed success would shield her from criticism, that a house and a car would silence the whispers. Instead, they had only made the questions sharper. A sudden heaviness settled over her. The silence of the house pressed in, thick and suffocating. She sank onto the edge of her bed, wrapped her arms around herself, and for the first time in years, allowed the tears to come. In church the following Sunday, she sat near the back, her red Bible resting on her lap. The choir's voices rose like a river of praise, but their joy barely reached her. When the preacher spoke of God's timing, she felt the weight of her own impatience like a stone in her chest. When the final hymn began, she could bear it no longer. She slipped out quietly, the echo of her footsteps mixing with the music. Outside, the afternoon sun blazed, but her heart felt cold. By the time she reached her car, her tears had dried, leaving only the ache. She leaned her forehead against the steering wheel and whispered to the empty parking lot, "Lord, why not me? What is wrong with me?" There was no answer, only the distant sound of children laughing somewhere beyond the church walls. That night, lying in bed, Esther stared at the slow whirl of the ceiling fan and felt the edges of her once bright spirit begin to fray. The pressure from her mother, the teasing of her friends, the silent judgment of society. Each one was a drop of water wearing away the rock of her confidence. For the first time, a dark, dangerous thought began to form, quiet but persistent. Maybe I need to force my own miracle. Maybe waiting is no longer an option. The following Monday began like any other, alarm at 5:30, the soft hiss of her shower, the clack of her heels against the polished marble floor. But something inside Esther had shifted. The weariness she carried was heavier than usual, her reflection in the mirror more haunted. Her colleagues noticed the change. At lunch, when Funmi teased her again about marriage, Esther did not even attempt to smile. Instead, she stirred her rice absently and changed the topic. Deep inside, a quiet storm had started to gather, an impatience she could no longer silence. That evening, when the bank's heavy glass doors closed behind her, she drove aimlessly through Enugu's winding streets. The city, alive with neon lights and the rumble of Kiki Napep engines, felt like a cruel reminder of her solitude. Couples walked hand in hand on the sidewalks. Laughter spilled from roadside bars. Every sound seemed to mock the hollow space beside her in the car. By the time she reached her duplex, a strange clarity had settled over her. She was tired of the whispers, the pitying glances, the endless cycle of prayers and blind dates that went nowhere. That night, she sat on her living room sofa, the blue light of the television flickering across her face. The program played, but she did not hear it. Her mother's voice replayed in her head. A woman's glory is in her home. Her friend's laughter echoed, sharp and unkind. The decision came like a sudden gust of wind. If the world will not give me marriage, I will take it. It was reckless. It was unthinkable. Yet the thought brought a strange, bitter relief. The next day, Esther confided in no one. She simply went through the motions at work, but her mind was elsewhere, calculating, searching. Who could she trust with such a dangerous idea? Who would even understand? That evening, as she scrolled through her contacts, her eyes rested on a name she had not thought of in years. Chuka. Chuka had been her classmate at the University of Nigeria, Nsukka. Back then, he was known for his smooth talk and his knack for making money from the most unlikely ventures. Printing flyers, running errands for lecturers, even selling exam notes for a fee. He was the kind of man people called streetwise, someone who always knew how to cut corners. Esther hesitated. She had not spoken to him in nearly a decade, but something told her he would understand. With a deep breath, she dialed the number. It rang twice before a familiar baritone answered. Hello? Chuka, it's Esther. From UNN, do you remember me? A pause, then a surprised laugh. Esther Ada. How could I forget the girl who always topped our class? My goodness, it's been ages. To what do I owe this honor? His easy charm loosened something in her chest, and before she could overthink it, the words spilled out. I need help, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Help? What kind? There was no elegant way to explain it. I need to get married. Quickly. And I'm willing to pay someone to make it happen. The line went silent. Esther could hear the faint sound of traffic at his end, the honk of a distant car. Finally, Chuka spoke, his tone careful. You mean you want someone to marry you for money? Are you serious? Yes, she said firmly, superseding even herself. I am tired of waiting. I am tired of my mother's taunts, my friends' jokes. I want it done. I will provide the money for the bride price. You only need to— Esther, he interrupted gently. This is not a small thing. Marriage is— I know what marriage is, she snapped, then softened. I know. But I can't. I can't keep living like this. I need them to stop. I need peace. There was a long silence. When Chuka finally spoke, his voice carried a hint of hesitation. You always were determined. Let me think. Give me a day or two. please, she whispered. Just help me. For the next 48 hours, Esther lived in a haze of nervous anticipation. At the bank, she signed documents and approved loans mechanically, her mind replaying the late-night conversation. When Chuka finally called, her heart raced. I can do it, he said simply. But Esther, are you sure? This is not a game. I'm not a saint. If we do this, there is no turning back, I am sure, she replied, though her stomach knotted with fear. He outlined the plan with the same business-like efficiency he once used to sell exam notes. He would come to her family with the traditional bride price. She would quietly provide the money in advance. They would wed quickly, no fanfare, no drawn-out ceremonies. And after, he asked, his tone unreadable. After? Esther hesitated. She had no answer. She only knew that once the ring was on her finger, the taunts would stop. The whispers would die. When she hung up, she sat in the silence of her living room, her hands trembling. Somewhere deep inside, a small voice whispered caution. This is not love. This is desperation. But she pushed the thought away. All she wanted was to breathe without judgment. That night, as she counted the cash she would give Chuka for the bride price, she felt both powerful and strangely hollow. The crisp notes glowed under the lamp, the symbol of her hard work, her independence. Yet each bill felt like a piece of herself being traded for a promise she was no longer sure she wanted. The following weekend, Chuka arrived at her family home with a practiced smile and the confidence of a man who knew how to play a role. He presented the bride price with quiet ceremony. Esther's mother beamed, her eyes glistening with triumph. Finally, Mama whispered, clutching Esther's hands. Finally, you have brought us honor. Esther forced a smile for the cameras, the crimson gel tight around her head like a crown in a cage. But as the ululations of the village women rose and the talking drums thundered, she felt a cold emptiness settle in her heart. This was the wedding she had bought with her own hands. And even as the world around her danced, Esther knew she had crossed an invisible line, one from which there might be no return. The first days of married life should have tasted of promise, sweet mornings of shared laughter, soft evenings of whispered dreams. But for Esther, the silence began almost immediately. The wedding had barely ended when Chuka's charm began to thin. Gone was the man who had smiled warmly while presenting the bride price to her family. The honeymoon glow that Mama had bragged about never arrived. There was no honeymoon at all, just two strangers sharing a roof, bound by a secret transaction neither dared name. Their new apartment in the highbrow part of Enugu should have felt like a fresh beginning. It was a two-bedroom flat with polished tiles and a balcony that caught the evening breeze. Esther had chosen the place herself, paying the rent in full to avoid any hint of financial dependence. She had imagined a quiet partnership, companionship, if not romance. But the walls soon became witnesses to a different reality. On their first evening together, she prepared a simple meal of jollof rice and grilled fish. She set the table carefully, 2 plates, 2 glasses of chilled water, a small vase of fresh hibiscus flowers she had bought on the way home. Chuka arrived long after sunset, the smell of alcohol and cigarette smoke clinging to his clothes. You cooked? He said, his tone flat, eyes already scanning the room as if searching for something more interesting than her. Yes, she said, forcing a smile. I thought we could. I already ate, he interrupted, dropping his car keys with a careless clatter. Without another word, he disappeared into the bedroom, leaving her alone with the untouched meal and the wilting flowers. Esther sat at the table long after the food grew cold, the ticking of the wall clock louder with each passing second. The pattern soon repeated itself. Chuka came and went like a passing shadow. Some nights he returned long after midnight, his phone buzzing with messages he hid quickly when she entered the room. On other nights he didn't return at all. When she asked gentle questions, "Are you okay? Where were you?" he met her with a smirk or a cold shrug. You wanted a husband, Abi? He said one evening, eyes hard as glass. You have one now. Why the interrogation? Stop acting like my mother. The words stung, but Esther swallowed her hurt. She had chosen this path, hadn't she? She had paid the price, literally, for the ring on her finger. To admit regret felt like a betrayal of the very reason she had forced this marriage. To silence her mother's taunts, her friends' laughter, her own growing fear of being left behind. She told no one of her pain. When her mother called, Esther kept her voice light. Mama, we are fine, she lied. Chuka is a good man. Work is just keeping him busy. Mama's delighted sigh on the other end only deepened the ache in her chest. At the bank, her colleagues gushed over her new status. Mrs. Chuka, Funmi teased, dragging the title like a sweet melody. How is married life? We expect wedding photos, oh. Esther smiled, her mask flawless. Married life is beautiful, she said. The lie tasted bitter, but she told it again and again until even she almost believed it. Yet every evening the truth awaited her, a quiet apartment, an untouched dinner, and the fading scent of Chuka's cologne lingering like a warning. 2 months into the marriage, the tension deepened. Chuka stopped pretending altogether. He no longer tried to hide his phone conversations. Esther would wake at night to hear him murmuring to someone, his voice low and intimate. When she confronted him gently, "Who were you speaking to?" he gave a short laugh. "Esther, I beg, don't start. I'm not a prisoner." The next day he left for an entire weekend without explanation. Loneliness wrapped itself around Esther like a heavy shawl. The house she had once filled with dreams now felt like a prison of her own making. She spent long hours staring out of the balcony, watching couples stroll beneath the streetlights, their laughter floating up like a cruel echo of what she had hoped for. The quiet, once comforting, now pressed against her like an invisible weight. Her heart, once desperate for the companionship of marriage, began to whisper a truth she was not ready to admit. She had traded her peace for an illusion. She had bought a wedding, but not a marriage. And with each passing by, the stranger she had chosen to call husband revealed just how costly that bargain would become. The Friday evening began with a sky streaked in gold and crimson, the kind of Enugu sunset that usually calmed Esther after a long day. But as she drove home from the bank, an inexplicable unease clung to her like the heavy harmattan dust. The streets were alive with the familiar sounds of weekend anticipation. Hawkers calling out their wares, the rhythmic buzz of Okada engines, the distant beats of highlife music. But none of it eased the restless knot in her chest. Traffic crawled along Zik Avenue. Esther drummed her fingers on the steering wheel, her mind replaying the small signs she had tried to ignore for weeks. The late-night calls Chuka ended abruptly when she entered the room. The strange perfume lingering on his shirts, a scent too floral to be mistaken for anything else. The sudden silences when she asked about his weekend plans. At first, she had swallowed her suspicions, convincing herself that she was merely paranoid, that this was just the stress of marriage adjusting. But tonight, the silence of the house loomed in her imagination like a dark question. When she finally turned into their compound, the gates creaked open slowly. Chuka's car was parked at an odd angle, as though he had driven in with careless haste. Her heart skipped. Inside, the apartment was strangely alive. The hallway light glowed faintly. Faint laughter, often unmistakably feminine, drifted from the direction of the bedroom. Esther froze. For a second, she thought it might be the television, but there was no accompanying hum of a screen, only that teasing, lilting laugh that did not belong in her home. Her pulse thundered. Every sense sharpened. The faint fragrance of an unfamiliar perfume hung in the air. Jasmine, sweet and heavy. The sound of a bed spring creaked lightly. She moved toward the bedroom, each step slow and deliberate. Her shoes barely whispered against the polished tiles, but inside her chest, her heartbeat roared like a drum. The door was slightly ajar. Through the narrow gap, she caught a flash of movement. Chuka's broad back, shirt half-buttoned, leaning close to a woman who sat cross-legged on their bed. The woman's hair spilled like a dark waterfall across the pillow, her lips curved in a bold, mocking smile. For a heartbeat, Esther could not breathe. The room tilted, the world shrank to the sound of their laughter and the sight of her husband's hand resting possessively on the stranger's thigh. She pushed the door open with a sudden force. The woman gasped and scrambled back. Chuka spun around, his face draining of color. "Esther, wait, it's not what you think," he stammered, eyes wide with the panic of a child caught in a lie. The other woman, bold a moment ago, now looked away, biting her lip to hide a smirk. Esther's voice was low, almost calm, but it trembled with an anger so deep it frightened even her. "Not what I think? Chuka, what exactly am I supposed to think?" He stepped forward, reaching for her arm. "Listen, please, this is just a friend. She flinched back, her eyes blazing. A friend? On our bed? At this hour? The silence that followed was deafening. The woman gathered her bag and slipped past Esther without a word, her high heels clicking like tiny hammers against the floor tiles. The scent of her perfume lingered long after she disappeared through the front door. Esther turned back to Chuka, her breath ragged. He opened his mouth, then closed it again, words failing him. For a moment, she saw not the man she had paid to marry her, but a stranger whose betrayal felt like a knife. Something inside her snapped, not in a storm of tears, but in a quiet, irrevocable break. Without another word, she turned and walked out of the bedroom. Her heels struck the floor like gunshots, each step a declaration. She entered the living room, grabbed her handbag, and stood by the door. "Esther, wait," Chuka pleaded, his voice cracking. "It was a mistake. Please, don't." She spun around, her eyes cold and clear. "A mistake? No, Chuka. This is exactly what we built. A lie, a transaction, and I will not live inside a lie." For a long second, neither of them moved. The only sound was the steady tick of the wall clock, marking the end of something that had never truly begun. Esther stepped out into the night, the warm breeze of Enugu brushing against her face like a final benediction. She did not cry. She did not shout. She simply walked to her car, her heart pounding with a clarity she had not felt in months. As she drove away, the city lights blurred through the windshield. The hurt was sharp, yes, but beneath it pulsed something stronger. Relief, the illusion of marriage had crumbled, and with its ruins came a single, powerful truth. She would never again trade her peace for the empty approval of others. The night after the betrayal stretched on without mercy. Esther lay awake in her old childhood bedroom at her mother's house, staring at the faint cracks that spiderwebbed across the familiar ceiling. The walls that had once whispered comfort now echoed only the noise of her thoughts. Memories of the evening replayed with cruel precision. Chuka's startled face, the mocking scent of the other woman's perfume, the quick click of high heels leaving her home. By dawn, her body ached from a sleepless vigil. A pale streak of morning light crept through the curtains, but it brought no peace. Instead, it sharpened the decision that had been forming in the restless dark. This was the end. She returned to the apartment after sunrise, her Camry slicing through the quiet streets of Enugu like a solitary arrow. The city was still half asleep. Only a few early vendors stirred, their soft calls for bread and akara rising like a lament. Chuka was sitting in the living room when she walked in. His shirt was wrinkled, his eyes red with fatigue or guilt. She couldn't tell. The air smelled faintly of a stale cologne and the jasmine perfume that no amount of open windows could chase away. "Esther," he began, rising quickly, "please, let's talk." She closed the door behind her with deliberate calm. Her handbag slid from her shoulder onto the couch with a soft thud. "There is nothing to talk about," she said, her voice level, almost frightening in its steadiness. He flinched at her tone. "It was a mistake. Stop." She raised a hand and he fell silent. "Do not insult me with excuses. We both know what this marriage is. It was never built on love. Only on my desperation and your convenience." Her words hung in the air, heavy and unanswerable. Chuka's face tightened. "So what now? You want to throw everything away because of one night? One night?" Her laugh was dry, brittle. "This has been building for months. Your late night calls, your disappearances, the way you look at me as if I am a stranger in my own house." He stepped closer, reaching out, but she moved back. "Esther, people will talk. Your mother? Let them talk," she cut in, her eyes bright with a fierce clarity. "For too long I have lived for their talk, for the whispers, for the gossip, for the approval of those who will never live my life. I am done." For the first time since she had met him again, Chuka looked truly lost. He opened his mouth, then shut it, words dying on his tongue. Without another word, Esther went to the bedroom. She pulled an overnight bag from the wardrobe and began to pack. Each folded blouse, each neatly placed pair of shoes felt like a piece of her old self being reclaimed. Her movements were calm, almost ceremonial. The quiet rustle of fabric sounded like freedom. Chuka lingered in the doorway, leaning heavily against the frame. "Esther, you can't just leave." "I can," she replied without looking up. "And I will." Her voice, steady and unshaken, was the sound of a door closing, not just the door of the apartment, but of the mistake she had once called marriage. That afternoon, she stood before a weary clerk in the Enugu High Court. The smell of old paper and fading ink filled the air. Outside, the sun blazed, unbothered by human sorrow. "I want to file for divorce," she said. The clerk barely looked up, his hands moving with the practiced boredom of someone who had heard every kind of heartbreak. He stamped the forms with a dull, final thud. The sound echoed through Esther like a bell of release. When she stepped back into the street, a breeze lifted the hem of her skirt, and the dust swirled gently around her shoes. For the first time in many months, her chest felt light. The heavy yoke of fear of loneliness, of gossip, of being the last unmarried daughter, slipped away like an old skin. She thought of the quiet nights spent yearning for a ring, of the laughter of her colleagues, of her mother's sharp words. All of it seemed distant now, like a play whose final act had ended. Esther drew a long breath. The air smelled of roasted corn from a nearby vendor, warm and sweet. She had once believed marriage was the measure of a woman. Now she knew better. Peace was the true prize, and she had just reclaimed it. That evening, back in her mother's house, the compound bathed in a soft orange sunset. Children chased each other with carefree laughter, and somewhere a radio played an old highlife tune. Esther sat quietly on the veranda, her face turned toward the fading light. For the first time in years, she felt no need to hide behind smiles or explanations. She was not a failure. She was not broken. She was free. The weeks that followed the divorce were a strange mixture of ache and awakening. At first, Esther moved through the days as though she were made of glass. Every sound seemed sharper. The distant cry of hawkers selling roasted plantain in the evening, the slow hum of Enugu's morning traffic, even the rustle of dry leaves outside her mother's veranda. All of it reminded her of how much she had lost and how much she had chosen to leave behind. Her mother's reaction came like a storm. The first call arrived the morning after the news reached their village. "Esther!" Mama's voice cracked through the phone like a whip. "What is this I am hearing? You left your husband? Do you want to bring shame to this family? Do you know what people are saying?" Esther held the phone against her ear and closed her eyes. The accusations, once capable of slicing her heart open, now felt strangely distant, like thunder rolling on the horizon. "Mama," she said gently, "I did not leave a husband. I left a stranger." There was silence at the other end, then a whinnying, heavy sigh. Mama muttered something about prayer and abruptly ended the call. Esther set the phone down and stared at her hands. They trembled only slightly. She realized with a quiet shock that the fear of her mother's disapproval, the fear that had driven her into a loveless marriage, no longer ruled her. Loneliness still came in waves, especially at night. Sometimes she would wake with the ghost of Chuka's laughter echoing in her mind, and for a heartbeat she wondered if she had done the right thing. But each time, the memory of that perfume, the jasmine scent of betrayal, rose like smoke, and she knew her decision had saved her soul. To fill the emptiness, she began to rebuild her life. First, she returned to her duplex, the home she had abandoned in her rush to be married. The moment she stepped through the gate, the familiar scent of hibiscus and damp earth wrapped around her like an old friend. Dust lay on the furniture like a thin blanket of neglect. But to her, it felt like a house waiting patiently for its owner. She spent a full Saturday cleaning, sweeping, scrubbing, wiping every corner. With each stroke of the mop, she felt a weight lift. The rooms, once silent and accusing, began to echo with the sound of her own laughter again. By evening, the house gleamed, and Esther stood in the center of the living room, breathing in the smell of lemon-scented polish. "This is mine," she thought. "This is me." The next step was her heart. Esther booked her first therapy session, a decision that would have seemed unthinkable months earlier. The therapist, a soft-spoken woman named Mrs. Ease, listened without judgment as Esther poured out her story. The words tumbled like a flood. The teasing colleagues, the pressure from her mother, the deal with Chuka, the betrayal. When she finished, Mrs. Easy simply said, "Esther, you have spent years living for other people's expectations. It is time to ask, what do you want?" For a moment, Esther had no answer. Tears welled in her eyes, tears not of grief but of recognition. She realized she had never truly asked herself that question. In the weeks that followed, she began to explore the answer. She joined a book club in town, where lively debates over African literature filled her evenings with laughter. She signed up for Saturday morning yoga classes in a small studio near Polo Park. She started taking slow evening walks along the quiet roads of Independence Layout, where the sunset painted the hills in hues of gold and purple. Neighbors began to notice the change. The once wary banker now smiled easily, her eyes bright with a quiet confidence. At work, Esther threw herself into a new community project, an outreach program that taught financial literacy to market women. She found joy in explaining savings plans and small business strategies to women who reminded her of her mother. Strong, determined, unbowed by hardship. For the first time in years, her career felt less like an escape and more like a calling. Her sisters, Amaka and Chidinma, came to visit one Sunday afternoon. They found her arranging bright sunflowers in a tall glass vase. "Big sister," Amaka said softly. "Oh, I wanted on it, Bali. We heard everything. We were worried." Chidinma squeezed Esther's hand. "But seeing you now, we understand. You did what you had to do. We are proud of you." The words warmed Esther more than she expected. The resentment she had once felt toward their seemingly perfect marriages melted into a quiet affection. They sat together on the veranda, sipping Zobo, as the afternoon light softened. For the first time in years, their laughter held no edge of comparison, only love. One evening, as the Harmattan breeze drifted through her open balcony, Esther stood watching the city lights flicker against the darkening sky. Somewhere in the distance, the sound of church bells mingled with the gentle buzz of night insects. She wrapped her arms around herself, not out of loneliness, but of a new gentle contentment. "Marriage is not the crown of my life," she whispered into the cool night. "I am enough." For the first time, she believed every word. The emptiness that once gnawed at her was replaced by something deeper, a peace that no ring, no approval, no whispered gossip could ever give. Esther had not only left a marriage, she had found herself. And in the quiet strength of her own heart, she discovered the beginning of a love story. One written first and foremost with herself. Months rolled by like a gentle river, carrying Esther further away from the storm she had survived. The sharp edges of heartbreak softened, and in their place grew a calm she had never known. Her days unfolded with a rhythm that was entirely her own. Mornings of quiet prayer, long walks under Enugu's rising sun, evenings spent with books that once gathered dust on her shelf. Her mother, who had once been the loudest voice of pressure, gradually grew silent. At first, Mama called often, each conversation beginning with thinly veiled disapproval. "So you are just going to stay like this, Esther? Alone?" But as weeks turned into months and she saw her daughter's eyes glow with a new kind of light, Mama's tone softened. One evening during a visit, she watched Esther laughing with Amaka and Chidinma over a bowl of pepper soup and finally sighed. "My daughter," she said quietly, almost to herself, "maybe happiness is not only in marriage after all." Esther reached across the table and squeezed her mother's hand. The simple gesture said what words could not. "I am at peace. I forgive you." At the bank, Esther's career blossomed in unexpected ways. Her work with the financial literacy outreach caught the attention of senior management. They praised her ability to connect with women in the markets, to explain complex concepts in words that sparked confidence. Soon she was asked to lead a citywide initiative, a project that not only elevated her professional profile but also fed a deeper purpose inside her. For the first time, her work felt like more than numbers and balance sheets. It felt like service, like meaning. The same society that once judged her for not wearing a wedding ring now applauded her for empowering others. But even as her professional life soared, Esther carried her personal healing with tender care. She no longer rushed to fill the quiet of her evenings. Instead, she learned to savor it, sipping tea on her balcony as the Harmattan breeze whispered through the hibiscus bushes, listening to the city's night song of distant music and soft generator hums. It was at a charity gala for the outreach program that Esther's path quietly shifted. The event, held in a grand hall at Independence Layout, shimmered with soft lights and the gentle clinking of wine glasses. Esther moved through the crowd of donors and community leaders with a confidence that no longer sought validation. By the buffet table stood a man she had not met before, a tall, gentle-looking man with streaks of gray at his temples and a quiet smile that reached his eyes. He was speaking to one of the market women when their eyes met. "Hello," he said warmly when she approached to greet the group. "I'm Kunle. I volunteer with the Orphanage Project." His voice carried no arrogance, only a calm sincerity that immediately disarmed her. They began to talk, first about the outreach, then about books, music, and the simple joys of travel within Nigeria. Kunle, a widower and father of one grown son, spoke with the ease of someone who had known both loss and growth. For hours they moved through the gala in quiet conversation, oblivious to the chatter around them. There was no flirtation heavy with urgency, no probing questions about timelines or marriage. Just two souls, sharing stories like old friends meeting after a long journey. As the night waned, Kunle smiled gently. "You carry strength like a song," he said. "It is rare and beautiful." The words settled over her like a soft blessing. For the first time in years, Esther felt no panic, no invisible clock ticking. She felt only the quiet recognition of someone who saw her for who she truly was, whole and unbroken. Later that night, back in her duplex, Esther stood on her balcony beneath a sky scattered with stars. The city lights twinkled like distant fires, and the cool breeze lifted the hem of her dress. She thought of the woman she had been a year ago, desperate for approval, willing to buy a marriage just to silence the world. Now she smiled, a slow, confident smile that came from deep within. She did not know what tomorrow would bring with Kunle or with anyone, and for the first time she understood that she didn't need to know. Love, if it came again, would be a gift, not a trophy, a gentle surprise, not a desperate pursuit. Esther pressed her palms together and whispered a quiet prayer of gratitude. She was no longer the woman chained by society's expectations. She was the author of her own story, strong, whole, and free. Marriage, she now knew, was not the ultimate crown of life. The truest victory was this: to love herself enough to wait for love to come naturally or to thrive even if it never did. Moral lesson: never let society's pressure dictate the rhythm of your life. Marriage is beautiful, but self-worth and happiness are not defined by a ring. True love, when it comes, finds those who have first learned to cherish themselves. Thank you so much for watching. We'd love to hear your thoughts. Share what you learned from this story in the comment section below. Would you like to see a part 2? Let us know. And guess what? Another powerful story is coming your way in just a few days. Be sure to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss it. If you enjoyed this video, hit the like button and share it with your family and friends. Thank you once again for being part of our storytelling journey.